Okay,
Would you like me to cover the earlier slides again? It's okay.
please.
I didn't go very far. So just to recap, in my presentation, I'm going to bring you up to date on the performance parking and commercial corridors pilot project funded by the Virginia Department of Transportation. And the activities we've been doing with the project since we last met was in the early spring. The policy underpinning for this project is the master transportation plan and the policy to utilize parking meter pricing strategies that vary by hour and location to better match parking availability and demand. A reminder of several of the things that the project doesn't do. We are not seeking to increase overall parking revenue. We are not seeking to increase all meter parking rates across the board. We are not decreasing the numbers of ADA reserved accessible parking spaces throughout the community. We are not creating dynamically or fast changing meter pricing. In other words, it's not going to be like the express lanes or surge pricing by buy-now companies where you'll be uncertain moment to moment what price you might have to pay. We are also not changing the type of curbside use from meter parking to something else entirely in any way. So ultimately, this project is about our metered spaces and about using pricing as a tool to influence behavior. Pricing and also occupancy information. This is our project map. The project is encompassing our two measurement corridors, the Roslyn Baltimore corridor in the north and our Pentagon City Potomac Yard corridor to our east. And this entire project area encompasses about 4,500 metered parking spaces. And I'll get into a little bit more detail about that. There are going to be spaces in our project area that don't have sensors in them. That sensor technology that I introduced in our earlier meeting, we're basically embedding sensors in parking spaces. But as you can imagine, segments of the street go under construction or are under construction now. We haven't had a chance to put sensors in. But if the meters are in our project area, we have fulsome coverage. But if they're in the project area, they will be a part of the pricing aspect of this project, if that makes sense. And we are largely complete with our installation. So we are at close to 4,200 out of the 4,500 meter parking spaces that have sensors installed in them. And all of our gateways are in, so we have full connectivity and we have a full data feed from these sensors. And it's pretty exciting to see those data. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. In the first phase of our project, we also conducted a great deal of outreach and engagement, and this was all geared toward primarily project awareness, making folks aware of what we were doing and why, and also asking people to consider the project goals, those goals that were adopted as part of the grant process, the grant application process, and the acceptance and award of the grant, but making sure that we're touching back with the community on the relative importance of those goals. And the kinds of things that were most important to folks when thinking about how we might change and affect the meter parking space. So during this outreach and engagement, we received 135 responses to our online feedback form. And we installed over 600 decals on the multimeters in our project area. And the 600 decals have a QR code on them that take you to our project page and will take you to that online feedback form. Actually, we received over 1,700 visits to the project page directly from those codes. We also engaged in 4 pop-up events, which touched a total of 100 people between June and July. Those are Boston Farmers Market, Roslyn Farmers Market, an event, Jazz event, and Courthouse Farmers. In addition to those engagements, because this first phase was really our installation and construction phase, we also conducted outreach throughout the process of installation of sensors alongside that construction work. So a couple of weeks in advance, we had door-to-door outreach to the businesses along those corridors to both make them aware that we're coming through with construction that might temporarily disrupt their customers and employees' access to the street, but also to engage them on the project as a whole, to let them know it's coming, to let them know why we're doing it. So we touched over 260 businesses in that way with door-to-door outreach on both corridors. We also met a lot of commissions, including you, and I'm now in a second round of those engagements with commissions and stakeholders to talk about this next phase of the process. So the results of our outreach from the first phase, I'm going to cover in a very high level, but we do have a full summary of our engagement results on the website. And I encourage you to check it out if you have some time. So overall, what we were hearing from people is that they are really interested in improving their experience with parking, especially if the solution that is at hand will save them time. People are excited also to see existing conditions. They are excited to track the outcomes with the data that we're going to see. So this is really one of those first moments where a lot of people have a lot of ideas about what they think is happening on the street, and they're excited to see what's actually happening on the street based on data. We also got a lot of feedback from parkers with disabilities that affect their mobility, and they were basically talking about wanting to retain good access to the street, concerned about paying higher rates, and especially because the more distant, potentially cheaper options that may be a result of this project may not be as feasible for them to use. And so in a little more detail, we did see a slight difference between respondents in our feedback form and respondents in the pop-ups. So in the feedback form, travel time, confidence finding parking on the first try, ease of finding parking were the most important things. In the pop-ups, we saw a couple new priorities that rose up higher: the reduction in mobile emissions and reducing double parking. And so what we really saw between the two was the folks who we were encountering at pop-ups were generally a little less likely to be using cars all the time. They probably live more close in and have more walking trips and those kinds of trips where they were looking at the secondary impacts of other people driving around them too. Also, in our feedback form, 16% of respondents reported a disability that impacts their mobility. And of the potential outcomes of the project, they tended to value more highly than other respondents: less double parking, less time looking for parking, and people shifting to less well-used blocks, as well as the potential for greater enforcement of the parking spaces on the street. So as we complete this hardware installation phase, we have entered into and are really focused on a sort of software development piece, which is our last final steps for getting us ready to actually do pricing changes. We are finalizing our pricing engine, which is the software tool and really vendor staff tool on how we will receive the data and the recommendations that staff will then work with and refine in order to make final recommendations that we can push to our leaders. We are also working intensively on our public interface designs, and I'm excited to say that we actually have two that we can bring forward in the project at this point. When I last met with you, we envisioned we would have one, which is the curve viewer, this sort of screenshot on the right, but we actually have another one that is going to be ready for prime time around the same time to start pricing changes. So that's the one on the left, and you'll notice they look really different. They do some of the same things, and then there are going to be some things that they do a little bit differently. But ultimately, there'll be different ways of visualizing the availability information. And you can see the one on the right does it sort of in a color-coded fashion, with darker colors being more full block faces and lighter colors being the more open block faces. And the occupancy information on the left is going to be more numerical and also with a color coding. So it's going to tell you how many spaces are available on that. And more spaces, it'll be green, so to speak. Again, these are being finalized, but it uses a different sort of symbology around it. And the one on the left also has the potential to provide navigation information. So you can identify down to the space, the availability, and you can see spaces by type, but then you can also say, help me navigate to this space or this location. So that's going to be an exciting thing. We're looking forward to hearing from community members about the relative benefits of these two different ways to do things. And of course, at the same time, we are developing and finalizing our public API for third-party developers. So these are two proof of concepts that will come through the project, but we also want to make sure that that API is available. And I have been asked, will there be availability information alongside the ability to pay for parking? And the best that I can say is that Our mobile payment option that we have today in Arlington is Spark Mobile. And they will have access to the third-party API, and they will be able to make the decision about whether they integrate that into the display. So I'm looking forward to working with them and hopeful that they will also be choosing to engage with our data and make it available to the public. And last, I wanted to mention that we are also working on a demonstration of a dynamic message display, which is sort of a physical display that will be out on the side of the street in strategic locations. The demonstration that we will conduct will be here in the courthouse neighborhood. We do not have locations finalized yet, but it's going to be testing the idea of having a display that can tell you so many spaces are available down this street for this price, so many spaces are available over here in this lot at this price, and other kinds of fine-tuned information that are sort of readily visible to a driver in a safe but comprehensive way. And we're hoping to also receive input on how these various sources of occupancy and price information can help people make decisions and make their parking experience better. So we're also digging into the data, as you can imagine. We have had a steady increase of sensors available over time. These graphs are actually from August data, and we are crunching September data, and we'll soon have October data. But I wanted to bring to you some shots of the types of ways we can look at these data, and that we'll be making views such as these available to the public for querying going forward. So these views show you occupancy trends over time of day. And we have highlighted Crystal City, Roslyn, Ballston, and Clarendon to show the difference, to show some lunchtime peaks and how we see in some neighborhoods. And this is at a neighborhood average, so you can imagine it's smoothing out activity here, but there are visible peaks of when most parking activity is happening in these spaces. There are also neighborhoods that have really clear evening peaks and evening activity, and it's not the same in every part of town. So we can use this kind of thing. We get the sense of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. is where the meters are currently active. How well does that encompass the most active times of day? And what might we see if, for instance, we look at Clarendon and we look at the later evening, and we might want to examine whether the later evening in Clarendon has peak activity on certain blocks that will warrant metering later in the day, for instance. Graphs like this at a more localized level can also tell us about, help us to figure out if we want to have different prices by time of day, which is another, is one of the tools that we are going to have let's take a talk about today. But ultimately, when we get to deciding on price, staff are going to be looking at this level of detail, which is really a map by block face showing peak activity in the area. So this is an example of the 3-hour parking occupancy peak for Pentagon City, for this part of Pentagon City, where these sensors are. And that 3-hour parking peak for this data sample turns out to be 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And this, I believe, is weekday activity, by the way. And so you can see that between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m., we've got average occupancy in some blocks showing red here that is over 80%. And that means it's high enough that it's going to be really hard to find a spot. And people might not find one at all on a block, or they might struggle to find one or be competing with other people for one, and it's a lot of things going on. We've got blocks here that are showing white, and white is what I would call, we could call it a Goldilocks area, where it's efficiently used parking, on-street parking, but it's not so well used that it's becoming difficult for people to experience, between 40 and 80% full. And then the blue are blocks that are under 40% full. And those are clearly not overoccupied, and one could argue that it's an underutilized resource. And depending on how proximate these blue type blocks are to red type blocks, they might become a proxy for shifting people's behavior if you raise the price in a red area and you potentially lower a price in a blue area. So we aren't looking at taking each block face and giving it an individual price, but we are going to be examining this level of detail to see if there are pockets of space that warrant price change next to other pockets of space that do or do not warrant price change. And ultimately, we are measuring our success with occupancy. So we do take to heart the inputs that we've received from the community are largely not about price. We didn't hear from the community that everyone wants free parking. We do get that occasionally. They want free and easy, but mostly what we heard was easier, less problematic, quicker. And so in order to provide that kind of parking access, we're basically looking at an occupancy measurement. And that's good to hear, right? Because that's what we can do with this project, is we can measure occupancy and try to influence it. So our process for measuring our success will be iterative, and it will be about that occupancy data. So this is our general model. We'll be gathering data roughly for 2 months. We'll be conducting analysis and then implementing and communicating a price change in that 3rd month in a 3-month cycle quarterly for the next 2 years, basically. Another key component of how we're measuring success is actually a partner project, an independent team that's separately funded by VDOT and led by Kim Horn that will conduct a system optimization of our project. And so what they're actually doing is they're taking our project goals and they're developing measures that are in scope for them, but out of scope for us, with some other data sources that they can access to look at variables that relate directly back to our project goals. So they'll be observing traffic volumes in the project area, circuity and travel measures, double parking, and looking at them all in relation to the kinds of changes we're making with the project, and maybe the areas where those changes aren't happening, and making sure that we can, if at all possible, see the effects that we're attempting to create. They will also be soliciting input directly from travelers. So they're going to be doing that probably in a number of ways, but most notably with a sort of parking experience rating effort. So as you park, if you're using Park Mobile, we're anticipating a prompt will appear if you park in the right area. It's geographically located to that meter zone. And it will ask you to rate your parking experience. And that data will be collected by this other team. And they'll be looking at pre and post projects. So pre and post price change, I guess, the way you think about it. So we're anticipating that work to go underway by the end of this month / beginning of this next month as they initiate that. And there will be QR codes, new QR codes and new links on multi-meters in these project areas to also trigger people to perhaps rate their immediate parking experience, which is a little different than how we use those details in the past. And that brings me to our immediate next step for the project, which is really to go to the board and request the permission to change parking meter rates administratively for roughly the next 2 years. And I wanted to share with you some of the key features of the proposed ordinance changes that we're hoping to implement and get your feedback on these features, and obviously answer any other questions that you might have on them. So overall, you're probably familiar with the current parking meter ordinance. Hard codes the rates, and it actually hard codes them and ties them to the time limit associated with the meter. So there's a specific rate, and there aren't a lot of them, but each rate is directly related to that time limit. And it applies to all meters in the county. So our proposal will apply only to meters in the project area. We'll retain the existing language so that it can continue to apply to meters outside the project area. And it will have a sunset clause. So I have in here roughly December 31st, 2025. This date will shift a little bit depending on when we can get to the board, when we can get the action, and when we can start this process. The authority to establish each quarterly meter rate change will be with the county manager or designee. And the manager, we expect, or designee, will of course see the proposed rates before staff. We'll see and approve the proposed rates before staff pushes them to the meters. Frequency of adjustments. The rates may be adjusted no more than quarterly. We don't have intention or really ability to change the rates any more often than that with our project. It's not because we need time to analyze the data. And it's not instantaneous to push it to the meters either. Thresholds for adjustments. The rates, we propose that our rates be able to be increased in response to high demand or decreased in response to load rate. So we're not specifying a certain amount, and that's because we might have to tailor that amount over the next couple of years. Time limits, which is a term for the permissible duration of stay at a given location. We don't actually have any intent to change time limits with a broad brush, because that actually requires signage changes, and that's not really in the main scope of our project. However, we do want permission to change them and have them be decoupled from rates, because we may find that in the analysis of duration of stay data from occupancy, it's not lined up with the time limits that are in that particular area, and we want to be able to fine tune that. So there's sort of the table is the letter of it. The yellow bullets are designed to explain to you our approach to implementing this, because it's not going to be exactly everything all at once. So one of the points I want to make is our current intent is to start a first rate change with only rate increases and not to also do decreases at the same time, primarily to see the level effect, and then to also have the geographic information that we get out of that to decide if there are proximate low occupancy areas that we should push down while we're pushing up, if that makes sense. So that's our current intent, is to start with rate increases and later changes, implement decreases together with the geography. Another intent is no initial changes to the prices of ADA spaces. We do have the ability to analyze the ADA reserved accessible spaces separately from the rest of the inventory. Tour bus as well is something that's pretty much separate, and you can imagine it would have different rules. So our goal is to really see what's happening in them, and then to use that information to make a decision about whether any rate changes is appropriate. And some other features, this is a long list here, but I just want to make sure you get exposure to them all. The complexity of rates, we do anticipate that rates may differ throughout the day and week. We also anticipate that the rates may be different by day and time. So what I mean by that is we might have metering on a day that doesn't have metering today. It could be Sunday. It's something that we can look at. Sundays happen to be the most occupied days of the weeks. If that makes sense. There's a lot of activity happening on Sundays. However, it's all about does the rate change help us achieve a management goal? So, but we want the ability to potentially adjust metering to different days as well as different times. And so that the example of that would be after 8 p.m. Do we want to have meters run longer at night? We also want the ability to change the geographic distribution. Today, everything's the same, so the rate structure may vary geographically. We also would like to keep on the table the possibility of escalating rates. And an escalating rate structure is when you park, and the first hour in that space that you park is one price, and the second hour is a higher price, and so on. And an escalating rate structure is very effective to motivate turnover. It's slightly different, and maybe in some respects a little more complicated than these other sort of flat rate structures. So we don't know yet how feasible or necessary it is to implement that tool, but we want it in the toolbox because, again, we want to be able to try things to see if things influence. And if we try something, again, I'll use the Barrington example, in a neighborhood at a particular time of the evening, and it's not moving the needle, instead of continuing to crank up the price, we might try an escalating rate structure instead, where we don't automatically make the price really high, but we start at one rate and then we encourage that turnover with a higher rate through an escalation. The incremental adjustments that we propose is really up or down in whatever increment achieves our project goals. And that's because we anticipate starting at a $1 per price change amount going up, but we might use a different increment when we decrease price, and we might decide that an increment in either direction needs to be adjusted based on the sensitivity. And lastly, we're proposing a maximum rate of $7 per hour, which is the most that we get to without another board action, and that equates to 4 times the current parking rate. But it also equates to what we would anticipate is the most possible $1 rate changes we could do in the entire course of the project. And so realistically, it's not gonna happen, because we're not gonna keep sort of blindly increasing the rate, if it's not responded, if we're not getting a response, by the customers. And finally, I wanted to summarize our upcoming outreach. So we do have a recorded presentation that's in a bit more detail than this one tonight, coming up soon. We're gonna post that to the web and advertise it around. We are also conducting an open house in December. And that open house is designed to dig into even more detail on our data. We're gonna have a lot of boards and information to help the public really get into and familiar with the kinds of data that we're gonna see and the type of analysis we'll do. And also get feedback on this proposed ordinance change. So that will also be featured in that open house. And that's December 6th, 7 to 9 p.m. in the building across the street. And I do want to pitch that I expect that the rating or parking experience piece will start later this fall, with opportunities to provide direct feedback on your immediate parking experience. And we are also planning for what we're calling small group conversations or informal focus groups with retail employees planned for early 2024. And with that idea being retail employees are a hard to reach audience that are almost certainly directly impacted by our project. And we didn't necessarily hear a lot from them in our first round of outreach, so we want to try to reach them directly and have several means of connecting on that, and we're hoping for some good turnout. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you. I guess since we don't have a quorum, we can't vote on this, but we can have a discussion about this. So open the floor to anybody that has a comment. Commissioner Singh.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a quick question about going back to slide 13, I think, the data visualization. Yeah, that's the one. So I guess my question is just looking at like the light blue versus the red areas. The red areas are places that have higher, that are, I guess, less available for parking. Correct. Okay, and so I'm just, I'm maybe worried about like if we're talking about, let's say, shifting where parking is happening. And let's say we're saying, okay, where these light blue areas are less occupied, maybe that it would be a way to kind of offset the parking in the red areas. Just looking at this map, that area where the light blue is on South Joe Street is I mean, there's quite a lot of pedestrian traffic there. There's like the housing on one side, there's Harris on the other side, so there's a lot of people around, and so I'm wondering how much, like, when we talk about managing the parking that goes on in an area, how much are we taking into account the pedestrians that are potentially being impacted by, let's say, an inflow of extra parking that's going on in those light blue areas? Because, like I said, there's quite a lot of people that walk around there, and so I'm wondering if there is a conversation to be had about, oh, we're going to increase, let's say, the amount of parking going on there. How are we addressing the pedestrians that are most likely going to be impacted?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I guess what I would say from the principles of the project is that when we look at the areas that you see in red, what we see are potentially malfunctioning blocks. So they have pedestrians, they have cars, they have bikes, they have other things going on that they're not working very well. So people trying to find, first of all, people are already trying to find parking there. That's their destination, and they're not finding it easily. So there's that potential for the double parking, the circling, the sort of tense moment when you're like, I don't know if I turn there or is it just not there that I should go. And that kind of distraction is what we think is the most risky for pedestrians. Whereas if let's just say we installed one of those digital displays and someone was using an app to plan their trip and they saw this and they were like, okay, I might be more likely to easily find a spot with this. Then they pick that route in advance. It's already planned. They go up and they find a spot easily, so they're not stressed out. They don't spend a lot of time walking with my plane, they just pull into their spot and they're good to go. So the principle of the project is that there's less potential harm to the better allocation of the resource and to the better decision-making ability of the parking customer, because they have more tools at their disposal. So that's the sort of principle behind it.
Okay, that makes sense, but I feel like, when it comes to finding parks, like street parking in general, that moment of panic of not being able to find a parking space, at least in my own experience, it's like, is the one moment of almost want to see recklessness from a driver or carelessness from a driver, because I'll be honest, I'm guilty of that when I'm trying to find street parking in, let's say, DC, and I don't have this place, and that's where I'm kind of panicking, and I'm not really thinking about, oh, if I make a wrong turn here, I might cause an issue, double park, God forbid, something terrible. So I think that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of the focus of the study here. So yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Winfield.
Hi, if you don't, actually, a few questions, following up on the discussion of using this slide. You said something about within a certain area, the rates would be all the same. It wouldn't change block by block. And how do we, so would this entire area then have the same pricing? And if so, then how do you encourage people to go to where the blue is, where there are spaces?
Right. So what we're working on is developing a sort of a price area structure that is as tailored to the hot spots and the low spots as possible. So we're actually trying to separate them when we do that. So to use as an example, and I don't have our current models sort of memorized, on this screen, what we would be looking at is maybe drawing a line down Hayes, and the spots to the west of Hayes are either go down or stay the same, and the spots to the right of Hayes go up, or just that rectangle on the top. Correct.
So
The pricing areas that we're looking at are smaller than neighborhoods, and they're not always the same shape, and they're not always the same size, because it really depends on that sort of hotspot nature, and sometimes it's linear along the whole corridor, and sometimes it's like a block, a couple blocks.
okay, good, thank you, that is some perspective. Okay, sorry about that. You also mentioned that you're going to be monitoring double parking. How do we monitor double parking? Because you can tell the spot is being occupied, parking spot occupied because of sensors. But there's no sensors for the double parking, so how do we know that there's double parking going on?
Yeah, so that's the great thing about the fact that VDOT is willing to pay another vendor to do a separate study with someone with additional money. Because they're the ones who are gonna actually observe that, and they're doing it through our public camera feeds. And they're gonna be watching 10, I think it's right now the plan is 10 study areas that are sub areas of our project, but are designed to be, to have like low areas and high areas next to each other to see, okay, there's a certain amount of, and this is where like technical words are not gonna match up, but you guys might have more experience with this than I do. They have like video analysis models that can read and see and measure and help count how much double parking is happening. And we would aim to see that go down in that area. And we might see behavior change in another area, so that they're actually gonna be the ones observing that, and they're gonna feed their findings to us on a quarterly basis.
So Crystal Drive, be one of those streets.
Well, the thing about Crystal Drive, thank you for asking about that, and I know, because it's on my bicycle commute home. Unfortunately, the block, the like most intense block of Crystal Drive, where all that stuff happens between, forget the streets, but it's like South 19th Street and North 26th, or 23rd maybe. It's actually not in the project. And it's not in the project because it's slated for the new bike facility improvement that you're probably familiar with. And because of the uncertainty of where the parking goes, and when that's gonna start, if we didn't install sensors there. So the spaces will have a price, this part of the project, but we don't have data about it, and we're not asking the VDOT system optimization folks to look at it carefully because we know it's just gonna be in flux.
Another place that you need the sensors is the new swimming pool facility, this will, just, you know, north of the city.
We did,
Oh, because it didn't look like on that that was included. The parking lot by the playing fields was included.
yes,
Not
that,
the one by the swimming pool.
correct.
Is there a reason why that wasn't put in?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I know we have been collaborating with Parks Department on, that's not the only parks facility in the project, there's also Virginia Highlands, which is here kind of in the middle of this neighborhood. That's part of this project too, it has sensors in it, so I can't tell you why the spots closest to the building, maybe they're not metered. I don't, okay, they're metered. Yeah, then I'm not sure, it might have just been that it was taken off the table, but they did allow us to have in the project the other lot. But it's not in the project for pricing purposes, it's in the project for analysis purposes. So as you can imagine, there's a public interest question on the parks facilities themselves being subject to this, because they also have different reasons why they have full. Sometimes they reserve those lots for different kinds of uses, and it changes the data a lot. So we're gonna do our best to help inform their management efforts with the data.
And the two apps that we show, is there a reason why we wouldn't go ahead and use both of them and see how people respond to them? And,
Yeah, we're gonna use both.
oh, both, okay, you are using both, I didn't pay up on
We're
that.
gonna push both of them out at the same time, yeah, because we want people to try them both, download them both, provide feedback on them both, and we're excited to hear from people about them.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
our mobile would somehow last year, so we could tell ahead of time what the pricing would be, that would help a lot.
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, the EDA space, I found a question. I can foresee, since we're not going to be changing the pricing on those, I'm really interested to see how the data works with that. What the occupancy change is, because the whole reason why we're charging on the EDA spaces is that people were getting tags, bogus tags, say park for free.
Yep.
And there was no EDA space left because there was full of people with the bogus tags.
Yep.
Well, now that there's a significant amount of price difference, I want to see if the bogus tag reemerges.
Right, that's a great point, and I would say, it isn't that we are promising to not change them at all in the project, it's that they're not gonna happen in this first change. And we're going to spend a little bit more time separately looking at it as a data set. One of our challenges is, one, I've heard from folks that they're concerned that people are still using them incorrectly. There are people using them who aren't eligible for them, and that would somehow push up the occupancy number and cause the cost to go up when the actual utilization is broader than the ADA group. One of the points that I've made is my hope, and in theory, if the project works, the principle behind the space is that it helps that person get as close access to a destination as they can. And they have to reserve the space because otherwise the block would be full and they have nowhere to park. Now, if our pricing nearby that space is effective and reduces the demand enough to have a space or two available, then if the ADA space is not available, there may still be a space on it. And so it should, they will have the same full occupancy data that you and I have on these apps. And especially in the app, I know the app on the left, maybe the app on the right, but I don't recall. You'll be able to see the occupancy of the ADA spaces that you can filter them. And so you can see if where you're going, if the ADA space is available or not, or if the space near it are pretty available, it's still playing around. So that's the reason for those things. So it remains to be seen whether the pricing is going to be the right tool to affect it, but I imagine over the course of this year, these 5 years, we're gonna be exploring.
Great, yes, that's why I definitely get doing it, I just wanted to, like I said, I'm really interested in data.
Yeah.
But I have a sense to go for that sort of thing. Thank you for those questions. If we were voting, I would be voting very much in favor of this whole project.
Thank you, Commissioner Shannon. Yes, good evening.
And notice we talked about the $1 increases up to $7 max, and then your conversations that you want to have with retail. I would be curious to see what the results are from the conversation on the retail side, pay equity, I guess you can call it, because, don't think it would go up to $7, but if you did get up to $7, it's something $15, $17 an hour is a considerable chunk of what they have to park there and pay for that. It's a considerable chunk of
Right,
their ratings.
we also want to talk to them. One of the things that one of the, again, the principles that we're aiming for is that some places make it more expensive because they're so high demand, but others could get less expensive. And so if we look and we see there are these blue, for lack of a better term, blue blocks nearby, what is a highly used corridor, then what our objective would be is to ask these retail employees, how feasible is it for you to walk those 2 blocks? And is that a realistic proxy for you for where you park today? Because we've heard anecdotally, as I want to hear more about the fact that if you're a retail employee, one, things that matter are, is it a short-term space and you have to go out and feed the meter every 2 hours? Because that's not enough for them either. So you might want to look at a change in time limit and price to make some areas make a little more sense for retail employees, but they're not necessarily going to be the most convenient ones because that's where customers go. If you put them in the wrong place, they'll get filled up by the wrong people, if that makes sense. So we are aware of the need to talk to them more, but we also are hoping that it's a dialogue where they also learn about how they can use the tool more to their benefit too. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. You mentioned that the Goldilocks scenario is somewhere between 40 to 80% occupancy. That's a pretty broad range. Like, what is a more accurate percentage that you would like to achieve? Because I know for like RPP studies, you have a percentage. This is a little bit different. What's like a good percentage of parking occupancy, the ideal?
Well, I guess if you were just trying to maximize utilization of your space, it would be around 80% or roughly 80 to 85%, depending on the size of your block, roughly always having a space bin.
Okay,
If that maximizes the utility of the asset. But what we're looking at, and the reason why we set this range is that the perception of the parking experience and the way that that affects drivers' behavior might not be the same as the optimal utilization of the asset. So we are sensitive to super low use. And we want to make sure that if we've got blocks that have metered parking that are super underutilized, that people know about them, they know where they are. One of the nice things about these maps is that they might for the first time provide people data about where metered parking is. Because right now it's just a guess. Even if you live in the neighborhood, you might not know where it all is. And so they can see it and they can say, oh, that's fine. I'm going to my friend's house for 4 hours, but I don't need to park in front of his house. I can park like 4 blocks away, pay a lower rate, so on and so forth. So we have, because we have such a wide variety of performance today between blocks that are chock full and blocks that are almost empty. If we could get everything to fit in that 40 to 80 range, we would be dramatically improving the bottom line for the county and the bottom line for our customers who use spaces.
thank you. And I don't see any other hands. Have a concern, please speak up. No, Mr. Commissioner Ludlow.
Yeah, just this is maybe a comment, and forgive me if I miss this.
Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
You cannot hear me. Okay. I am sorry about that.
I can't hear you. Can you hear us?
Just I can hear you.
We can hear you online.
Yeah, you can hear us.
Oh, you can hear me
Okay,
online.
it looks like we have an audio issue in this specific room.
Okay. It's okay. I this is something that can wait. Thank you.
What about now? You're muted now.
Can you hear me now?
Still nothing.
Okay, we can move on. It's okay.
We can't hear you. Sorry. And the PC computer is not working. That's where the volume comes from, this component. If he phones in, I can see the video here. David, will you try to, I'm sorry, not David, Donna, will you try to phone in and see if I can pick you up on the Surface laptop?
Is what we're getting that smoother down. And we're not voting. I'll provide my comment. What I think about this, and I think this is great to provide you all the tools to really arrive at an informed data-driven policy. So all of the flexibility in terms of pricing, in terms of expanding, potentially expanding the hours of metering and breaking down the geographic zones. I think that's really great, and I'm interested in what the data will be overall and how it can inform other things, the way we organize our county, not just the parking pricing. So, thank you.
See where he's called in. Are you submitting something in the chat instead? It's on our end. Our team's PC is not including okay, so fortunately, you don't have any items to vote on tonight,
Right.
because we don't have a quorum, so it's just discussion. So please say, Donna, if you can send in your comments, that would be great. Okay. He said it's in a comment thing. Thank you, Donna.
Okay, that concludes this agenda item, correct? What about them? Thank you for your time, Jim Manager, McMahon. Yeah. What about the train system here in person? All right, that's great. So it would be on Teams.
Yes, we have an update on the transit strategic plan with Satchberg, Benson, Edwards.
Chairman Slay. Co-chairman, commissioners, good evening. My name is Colton Edwards, and I proudly serve the Arlington Transit Bureau as the transit services manager. Last month, we came before you. Colleague Paul Monday, one of the project managers, he was here in front of you all as we did a robust review of the transit strategic plan. So what we're going to do tonight is that we just have a short presentation. We are going to discuss the question that you all had and just bring an update back to you all. Richard, will you bring the presentation or would you like to? Okay. That is just fine. Thank you very much. So a few that Richard brings up the presentation. We also provided the total transit strategic plan document. The over 200 document is available on the Transportation Commission website. So you'll see that
You'll see our goals, our objectives, all the analysis in chapter 2. In chapter 3, you'll see the recommendations on the route level for all 16, and then the introduction of the 17th route. In chapter 4, we're talking about the implementation plan, and then you'll have chapter 5 in the appendix. Review that and peruse that as you make your opinions. All right, so we're just going into our 4 slides tonight. So our strategic plan desired outcomes. So here you see on this first slide, these are the goals of the strategic plan. You'll see that we have them grouped into buckets, into 3 buckets of the 8 goals. They are grouped into the safety, quality, and performance, equity and sustainability, and communication and collaboration. So of course, goal number 1 is to promote transit as an attractive transportation option. Here at Arlington, we live by the moniker of car-free diet. So using transit is a way of life that we're trying to get folks to ditch their single occupancy vehicles and utilize public transportation. Goals 3 and 5, you see those are highlighted together. Those are equity and sustainability goals. And then finally, we have our communication and collaboration goals, goals 6 through 8. Of course, creating a safe and positive workplace, and then ensuring accessible communications and proactively collaborating with regional partners. As we are a very multimodal county, we have heavy rail, metro bus, commuter rail, various other forms of public transportation, and capital bike share. So what we did when we looked at these 8 goals on our next slide is that we talked about what that came to you all, and you all asked about the prioritization of how we actually came to this. So on the next slide, under prioritization, the recommendations developed to support the goals of Arlington Transit basically are these 3 buckets we have here: safety, quality, and performance, equity, sustainability, and communication and collaboration. So we use these 3 sets of buckets of goals to develop and come up with our prioritization on how we wanted to implement in the short term, the midterm, and the long term, which we presented to you all last month. Then if you can go down to the 3rd slide, we just covered this one, and then next one. So these are the specific comments that we received from you all during the September 26th meeting of this commission. We received comments on or you all provided us comments, excuse me, on the 75 to 77 in the CSP document. We didn't recommend region service. However, after talking with the general public with our robust public outreach during the months of June and July, we made changes to the TSP since that September the 1st document, and they were augmented so that weekend services now being recommended on the 75 and Sunday service for the 77. We also received another comment from this commission about it's hard to understand the comments in Route 84. We added the language that you'll see in the final document about the review of the route through Douglas Park and the time of implementation. Also, we received a comment from you all regarding take service to Boston and extend 43 there. And then we added the language to the actual final document to consider the Boston Marymount University a time of implementation based on bed availability. Many of you all may be aware of the work that was done at Boston Multi-Metro, that Boston Multimodal project, excuse me, that project that increased the number of bays. And so as we get closer to doing the implementation of the Route 43 in the midterm, based on our short, midterm, and long-term recommendations, we will definitely take a look and consider that, extending that to the Boston and the Metro Rail Station. Just scroll down to the next slide. Also received comments on microtransit. Of course, you see here it states that what you should consider a success, and then typically trips with a microtransit are more expensive. We'll be conducting a feasibility study at the beginning of next fiscal year to just make sure that, as we have it proposed in the transit strategic plan, that microtransit installation actually makes sense to implement. It's not just something we're doing just to. Route 55, we received a comment that off-peak service is bad. The recommendations that are within the photo document call for 12-minute headways, which is 12-minute frequencies, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then 15 minutes, 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. And then 15 minute service all day and Saturday and Sunday. The increases to the weekend frequency will be made early in implementation, and increases to the weekday will be made as demand dictates. I know there's an adjoining plan, list boulevard study that's ongoing, and so that is being responsive to this. Route 45 and 85, if you all remember from last month, these two recommendations have services untraditional to what we generally do with Arlington Transit. These two have recommendations providing services outside of the county borders. The 45 going to Fairfax County in an effort to connect to the Route 7 bus rapid transit line that is looking to open in the 2030s. And then the Route 85 being extended to the Virginia Tech. Put on your brand new Metro Rail station in Alexandria. So we really felt like these were two important connections. And with this comment that we had back is that just wanted to make it clear that Omada is the regional bus provider, but we wanted to have this in our plan just to make sure that it's known that we feel like this is a very important connection. We want these passengers to have this one seat ride to Fairfax County to be able to connect to the high capacity frequent bus rapid transit line, and then the 85 connected to the Metro Rail station there at the Virginia Tech Potomac Yard Station. Two more comments in response to comments we received when we came before you all last month. Just go down to the final slide today. It was heard that you all would like to take a field trip. We love field trips. We love showing off all of our awesome projects. We do an annual field trip with the Transit Advisory Committee during the summer months, and we would definitely like to invite you all to join us there for that tour. We'll do it next summer. So we have a lot of exciting projects. By next summer, hopefully, fingers crossed, will be at substantial completion with the Arlington operations and heavy maintenance facility. So maybe that would be actually a location we can actually go in and visit at that time, pending the completion of construction. And then our chairman asked for a metric that would be easily shared with the community. I know that you are a transit enthusiast and you wanted to be able to tell all of your colleagues and friends and neighbors about just a metric you can use when looking to talk about transit in public. So we had this metric that came out of table 26, directly from the transit strategic plan. Table 26 just talked about just the transit accessible population within a quarter mile of transit, the Arlington County total, and the percent accessible by transit. So this metric kind of gives you a thought or gives you information on how in the population of Arlington County, how many persons are accessible to transit, and then the jobs within the county that are accessible to transit. And the last percentage gives you a percentage of how much of the population and how many jobs are accessible by transit within Arlington County. So those were our responses to the comments that we received last month. Any questions or comments?
All right, yeah, thank you for coming in and refining some of those answers on what was already a very detailed presentation last month. Commissioner Furman.
Yes, thank you so much for coming back and presenting some of these follow-up items. I really wanted to compliment the inclusion of the weekend service on the 75 route. Continuing to see that ridership on that route, sometimes exceeding 2019 totals. So very exciting to see that that's going to be expanded to weekend service, right? I think there's a real need both for connections to Ballston, but to Shermanton on the weekends for, the nightlife that's in both those locations. I hope that route really do well on the weekends. I also want to compliment the Route 85 expansion to Potomac Yard. I know that goes outside the county, but it's another Metro Rail station that's just outside of our boundaries. And I think it's great that we can have a single seat connection to that location. It's a place that I've been biking with my girls more frequently because there's a lot of good bike infrastructure that goes down to that station as well. So it's great that we'll send bus route going that way too. So again, just really wanted to compliment this overall. Thank you so much, Jason.
Absolutely, thank you.
Commissioner Antoni.
Yeah, I also want to thank you for the 55. I have a question about that. Plan Langston Boulevard in the latest draft is calling for a 10-minute headway ultimately. Is when you're saying you're putting in 12, does that still leave open the possibility of reducing headways should the demand be there? Or is this your ultimate goal is 12 once the demand is there?
Thank you, Commissioner. One thing that we have to do on an annual basis as a requirement of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation is that we have to continue to look at the recommendations prior to implementation to make sure that they balance the smell test. So like you're saying, as we're looking at the demand and then the development happens from the Mason Boulevard corridor, and then it calls for an increase in the amount of service from 12 minutes to 10 minutes, and that would be something that we would review after this one discussion, looking at how much the cost would be associated with that and adjust accordingly.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that that was the final.
Yes, we have to look at these on an annual basis, just to make sure they pass the smell test. Like, for instance, if we have a recommendation that just isn't going to work the way we thought in the short term, if we push it out to the midterm, they should maybe push it out the long term, and vice versa. There's recommendations that are in the long term that need to be implemented. In the short term, we have the opportunity to pivot and make those changes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I see the commissioner saying, but I'd like to jump in because my question is related specifically to that, number 55 bus route. And, like, how exactly are you gonna be measuring demand? Because usually it's the frequency that drives the demand. And if you have a more infrequent bus, there will be less of a demand for it. So how will you be making that decision? I mean, you mentioned the level of development along that route, but what other factors might be going into that?
I think I would say that it's going to be as the development comes along, and we'll be able to look at the demand based on the level of service that we have out there. We have automatic passenger counters on the board, so we'll be able to look at the load factors and see that if we're having full buses all the way to time on Mason Boulevard, it's like, okay, maybe we need to add additional service. So we have different measures, looking at ridership, looking at passengers per revenue hour, looking at passengers per revenue mile, that will give us an indicator that we need to turn up the frequency on a particular route. And that goes for any route in the entire system.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Singh.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the increasing frequency. I think I think that's really important, and I appreciate that being considered. I did have a question, it's more of a comment, really. On the last slide, and I appreciate you sharing the metric there. And those are great metrics: transit accessible population and transit accessible jobs. And the percentage that has 92-94% is, it looks really nice. And I think the only thing that I would caution or ask to consider is when we talk about transit accessible jobs, that's a great number, 150,000 within a quarter mile of transit, but there are a lot of, most of this area, just if you look at Arlington County, the DC area in general, most neighborhoods have access to transit, like as just an access to any kind of transit, bus stop, metro rail, what have you. And that's the case for most neighborhoods in this area. But I think the real question of equity is whether or not those transit options are all good quality transit options. And so when we talk about transit accessible jobs, I think it's really important for us to think about, are all of those, the transit that we're talking about, are they all good quality? Because I live in this neighborhood, the courthouse neighborhood has really good quality transit options, right? And I can get to a lot of jobs with good quality transit in the courthouse neighborhood. That might not be the case in other neighborhoods where, sure, there might be a transit stop near me, but it's not a frequent enough the transit there is not as frequent enough, and so I can't access as many jobs. And there's some good research from Transit Center that's talked about how in the DC region, it's generally people of color and low income individuals are usually the ones that kind of get the short end of the stick. We're sure there's transit near those neighborhoods, but it's not good quality transit. And so the metric that we're using of transit accessible jobs is really good, but I think it needs to be, it's not hitting on that nuance of, okay, it's transit, but it's a good quality transit. Not, it would be nice to see like, maybe like a map of like, hey, here's the distribution of transit, here's where it's really good, here's where it's not really good, and that would give us a good sense of like, okay, well, then these are the neighborhoods that maybe we should be focusing more on when it comes to increasing frequency, so that those people not only have transit, but they have good quality transit that can get them to where they need to go.
Absolutely, I understand what you're saying, and when as you're reviewing the plan, in chapter 2, it does a very deep dive into looking at the entire system basis, where there's high capacity, high quality trains available to, what you're saying, transport accessible jobs to maybe something that's like a different route that's only running in the AM peak and the PM peak, and folks that need to move around in the middle of the day, they don't have the opportunity. So chapter 2 really digs deep into that, looking at the existing transit system and going to that metric in more depth.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you, and I think that the, especially when it comes to like the goal 6, ensuring accessible communications, really nice that that's there, because that information is going to be out there, and it's important for people to know where that is, so I appreciate that that goal 6 is there, that's really comforting to have, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that as well, because when you were going through this metric, the frequency issue popped up in my head as well. And I don't know, how you go around collecting all your data, and this might be a little bit harder to do, but this statistic with like the qualifier, this amount of jobs accessible on a bus with a 12-minute headway. Because I think like having that extra detail on there would really make it understandable for the ordinary person who's not going to be reading all of these reports, and also I think it would combat like a lot of perceptions about transit that are no longer true. Like the fact of the matter is the quality of service has increased a lot in this area recently, but people still think they're 30-minute headways for a metro train when that's not the case. And so I think adding like a little time qualifier on the statistic would be great. But thank you for bringing this data as well. And Commissioner Shan.
Well, mine's a little lighter, so that sounds like a little better. Just on the field trip, can I bring my son? Explore, he really likes buses.
And one like for mine, he's actually watching right now.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, it doesn't look like there are any other questions or comments. Thank you for coming here and updating us. Appreciate all the good work you all are doing, and we'll take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can someone give me a thumbs up? Can you all hear me on the call?
We can hear you, but there's an echo.
What about now?
Same.
What about now?
Sounds good.
Okay. We still have a bit of an echo.
A little, yeah.
What about now?
Same.
We're all preparing to join the meeting virtually so that we can have good audio and video. There is an issue with the PC in the county boardroom, so just give us a moment or two and we'll log into the meeting. Thank you. Guys want to continue? Okay, we are all joined here virtually. And I'm still getting feedback. Can you hear me on the call? Okay.
Yes, and no.
Okay,
echo.
I
I can hear you.
sincerely apologize about the technical difficulties. We're having a little bit of trouble with our monitor here. So the next agenda item is the Langston Boulevard Area Plan. And we have Natasha Alfonso presenting on this item. Natasha?
Thank you, Bridget. Yes, my name is Natasha Alfonso Ahmed, and I'm with the Planning Division for the county. And with me tonight are Kristen Calkins
Here.
from DES and Ryan Bauma, our planning consultant, who's assisted the county with this study. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you all can let me know if that's visible.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. And I will proceed. Okay, so as we said last time we were here, we're currently completing the last phase of a multi-phase planning study that began in 2019 to develop a comprehensive plan for the Langston Boulevard corridor that will guide both public and private investment long-term. This plan includes policies and recommendations and design guidelines to support the goals and vision of a green Main Street, as well as implementation strategies. The planning process has provided multiple engagement opportunities since the beginning of the study. Most recently, our engagement for the first draft, which was released in June of this year, included an online engagement form, in-person open houses and focus group meetings. We also briefed multiple commissions and advisory boards and held a county board work session to seek feedback on the plan's recommendations and staff's perspectives related to community concerns. On September 7th, we presented to this commission the first draft of the plan. At the end of September, the staff released the second draft, which it was the RTA draft, or the request to advertise draft. And in October, we presented the RTA draft to the Planning Commission and the County Board, and both approved the request to advertise the public hearings in November, which you see listed on the slide. So on October 14th, along with the advertisement of the public hearings, the County Board approved 2 revisions to the draft plan. The first was to remove a policy recommendation for consolidation of public uses, including recreational facilities and activities. And the second was to change the timing for considering the review of the Cherrydale and East Falls Church adopted plans to short term. So at the upcoming hearings, in November, the Planning Commission and the County Board will be considering the adoption of the Langston Boulevard Area Plan and associated amendments listed here. The final draft of the plan was released last night, and if you're interested in seeing that, it can be accessed off the project webpage. So the plan's vision for the corridor elements apply to the complete planning area. However, the recommendations focus primarily on the core area for neighborhoods 2, 3, and 5. Neighborhood areas 1 and 4, which are East Falls Church and Cherrydale, have adopted plans and policies in those areas will continue to apply. So the plan's policies and recommendations are centered around economic sustainability, environmental resilience, and equity. The plan proposes goals and policies for 9 key planning elements supported by design principles and guidelines that are related to the built environment and the public realm. The plan's goal is to incentivize positive change in the core areas that can meet the county's goals and community aspirations by providing other choices besides by right development, which we know will only exacerbate the problems that we have today. So through extensive feedback, we heard support for many of the planning policies, including support to transform Langston Boulevard to a multimodal corridor. We also heard concerns on several key topics that are listed here, including concerns around the plan's recommendations to expand the street grid and reduce the travel lanes east of Spout Run Parkway. Additionally, some have also expressed the importance of county participation in achieving the ultimate cross-section for Langston Boulevard. So to achieve the vision for a green Main Street, a new land use framework is needed that concentrates development in the core areas to support commercial activity, expanded residential uses and densities, and access to new public spaces. The land use framework supports the transportation policies by concentrating development that again encourages walking, biking, and transit use. So the policies on transportation focus on creating complete streets that accommodate all modes of travel adequately and safely, reducing driveways to minimize conflict points, expanding the street grid, pedestrian and bicycle networks, enhancing transit service, and promoting different kinds or different parking strategies. So the plan includes recommendations for expanding the street grid in all neighborhood areas, particularly near intersections, to allow for access to new development to be consolidated. This helps to reduce driveways along Langston Boulevard and other major arterials to improve safety for all modes of travel. The plan also identifies intersections for future study in all neighborhood areas. The plan includes recommendations for bicycle facilities in all neighborhood areas and cross-sections for the various segments of Langston Boulevard. So as you can see here, this is the street network map for Area 3, the bike network map, and cross-sections for Area 3. And again, recommendations for Area 5 West for street grid expansions and bike facilities and cross-section for the Area 5 West segment, and the same with Area 5 East. So to address the concerns that we heard, the RTA draft, which again was released in September, and we presented this at the last meeting, provided additional language to emphasize that vehicles will continue to be the predominant mode of travel in the foreseeable future, to clarify where and how county investments will be made, and that improvements to the corridor will be incremental. The draft modified the proposed transit actions to indicate that the county will monitor, evaluate, and study opportunities to enhance transit, reduce travel times, and improve transit reliability along the corridor, including through the TSP's recommendations, as we heard tonight. So the plan also indicated that more detailed transportation analysis of the Area 5 cross sections for Langston Boulevard is needed in coordination with VDOT. It also added new language and guidance about parking and identified 2 new intersections in Area 5 East to be locations for future study. So the final draft that was released last night amended policy TC9 to clarify that pedestrian and cyclist crossings should be improved along all roads, not just Langston Boulevard, and includes a definition for enhanced bicycle facilities to clarify that these are low-stress facilities for bicyclists that provide protection or separation from vehicular traffic. So to implement the plan, staff recommends amendments to the general land use plan map and booklet, the master transportation plan map and zoning ordinance. The MTP amendments include adding the planning district boundary as a new area that's planned for new streets on the MTP map, and amending the second page of the map to note that this is an area with new planned on-street bike lanes. So in conclusion, staff is requesting that the commission recommend adoption by the county board of the plan and associated amendments. And, you know, we do understand that tonight you don't have a quorum, but that was our initial recommendation. So that concludes my presentation, and all 3 of us are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. All right, thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to the other commission members for comment. Commissioner Lantelmi, seems like you'd like to go first.
I want to turn my audio on. Yes, I have a couple questions. And first off, I'm president of the Langston Boulevard Alliance, but I'm here tonight as a member of the Transportation Commission, and any of my comments or opinions are mine and are not necessarily those of the Langston Boulevard Alliance. That said, a couple of questions. When we are, and this did, I did raise this at other meetings, so I just want to reconfirm. We're recommending additional streets in, for example, in areas 3 and in areas 5. That'll be crosshatching on the MTP to show that new streets would go there. That would be done as part of the site plan, probably as part of the site plan. I have a couple of things I just want to make sure are understood. First off, any new streets would be not done through eminent domain, but instead would be done as part of the negotiations through a site plan or through a voluntary purchase by the county. Is that correct? Because we don't say that anywhere since it doesn't address eminent domain whatsoever in the plan, which I think is appropriate. I just want to make sure that's clarified.
Yes, that is the intent of the plan, that any of these new connections would be realized through site plan process. We're not planning on pursuing eminent domain for these new connections.
Great, thank you very much. The second question I have is that when there is the cross-hatching for new streets to go through, right now on the plan, it does say it's labeled as a street. Can that also include simply a right of way that does not necessarily have vehicles on it, such as bicycle or pedestrian rights of way, public rights of way? Could those count as additional or as the connection when it comes time to negotiate and plan a specific site?
So the plan starts at the high level that all of these connections are assumed to be for all modes: vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists. At the time of site plan, through the process, if it's determined that a different modal use for connections is appropriate at that time, that's where we would have that conversation. But right now, for this plan, we're not planning on reducing any of the anticipated modes that will use these planned connections.
Thank you. That I want to make sure we just said that, because that's what I thought, and I think that's the right approach. But thank you for that clarification. And the other thing I just want to mention is I do support that we are have in there as one of the recommended action items is having enhanced bus shelters, real-time screens for arrivals. The enhancement to transit, I think, are going to be very important for this, and I'm very happy to see that they are in there as the implementation items. So thank you. I will go on mute.
Commissioner Furman.
Yes, thank you both so much for presenting this evening. I want to echo some of what Commissioner Lantelmi was saying, but also just to advocate, because we've heard from some of the citizens who have come before us that specifically 25th Road North, the new road that would be proposed in that segment, as well as I think the majority of the entirety of Area 5, the street grid expansion in that area, just to really consider those locations in particular as being non-vehicular right-of-ways potentially, just because I think that the local community is open to those being useful pathways for people to transition through. But I think there's a good bit of hesitation to the concept of having vehicular traffic using these roads, in particular 25th Road North, because I think there's concerns of that becoming a cut through and creating a little bit of a dangerous intersection just north off of Langston Boulevard. I know you all are looking at that in a much more detailed way, but I just want to reiterate those concerns because we've heard that from a few folks who have come before us.
Thank you for the comment. I think the answer we just gave to Commissioner Lanatomi really helps emphasize that no decisions on those are being made right now, but I do want to stress the importance, especially in Area 5 West, a little bit for the 25th Street connection. We do need vehicular connectivity on a number of these planned streets in order to make the circulation in these new developments work. A lot of the challenges we face on Langston Boulevard today are due to the significant number of curb cuts that exist. There will need to be circulation through these sites. All determined through the site plan process with detailed analysis, so we can answer those hard questions about the anticipated amount of vehicles that might come through a neighborhood or how our intersection would work. But I do just want to say here that through this planning process, we're entirely too high of a level to limit our ability to plan in the future for what we might need and what could very well work following a detailed analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your response.
Anyone else have any comment? I think Commissioner Ludlow, we can hear you now. You can probably join us if you have something to say. All right. Well.
No, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I'll follow up on what Commissioner Furman was talking about in relation to the MTP. The MTP really, which is our guiding document here, of course, the Master Transportation Plan, really emphasizes the importance of grids for vehicular traffic as well. And I understand there are a lot of neighborhoods that don't want cars passing through, that for many obvious reasons. Road safety, you want your kids playing out in the streets, but the fact of the matter is these are public roads, and there shouldn't be special treatment for some neighborhoods and not others. So we're looking at the whole transportation network and grid as a whole. And so I support the vehicular right away, with the caveat that there be as much possible protected bike lanes and separation of pedestrians, cyclists, and cars. And ultimately, the goal is to have fewer cars, so we can enjoy our streets more safely. Thank you. Okay, it looks like there are no other comments on this issue. Thank you for your patience, and yeah, we can do that. Commissioner Ludlow, let's close this agenda item, but thank you all for being patient with us tonight. With all the technical difficulties, but Commissioner Ludlow, if you want to go to the previous agenda item and get in the public record, that'd be great.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, with respect to my earlier comment would have been about the technology being used, the PUC technology or sensor technology for the parking detection. In my experience, working with a number of DOTs, the in-ground sensors have had a high rate of failure, have not lived up to the lifespan that has been promised, and in many circumstances, especially in truck parking lots, have found that the higher initial price of cameras using kind of AI detection of space occupation has been a more sustainable way to do that over the long run. So I think maybe the technology is already set for the pilot, and that's okay. I just would want to consider some of the lessons learned in other parts of the country. And if the issue is that the cameras are seen as unsightly or there's no place to mount them, that's understandable as well if it's a streetscape aesthetics issue. But just wanted to mention that the sensors have been more expensive in a lot of circumstances just due to the maintenance that is involved. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And it looks like they're already going to have a camera component to it with to monitor the double parking. But yeah, that's a good comment. Thank you. Okay, it looks like that concludes our regular agenda. We have other business matters. If anyone has anything, any comment?
The only other item that I have is an alternate for Bellwood's special blood study.
Okay,
If someone's interested in volunteering for that.
all right. I guess we'll send that out via email to see if we have any volunteers. I actually have another item, and it concerns the Capitol Bike Share Station, the relocation from Penrose Square to a low traffic and poorly visible spot 2 blocks away as a response to drivers not observing traffic rules while getting their Starbucks orders. So several of us already wrote to County Manager Schwartz expressing our concerns, and constituent services manager Caitlin Thomas was nice enough to email a detailed explanation of the staff's thought process for the relocation. She highlighted the context, and we're quoting, "There are competing transit priorities given a finite land source," end quote, and the need to, quote, "alleviate congestion and improve pedestrian safety," end quote. Furthermore, she highlighted that this is only a temporary, not a permanent solution. I thank the county manager's office for elaborating its thought process on this issue, and I sympathize with the difficulty of juggling multiple demands, but I find the decision problematic and a terrible precedent, even with the explanation. First, data, common sense, and general lived experience demonstrate that pedestrian safety is incompatible with making it easier for cars to enter a space. So you can build a space that works well for cars or works well for people, but not really both at the same time. And the current decision, which will increase the number of parking spots in a rear pedestrian plaza, will also increase the amount of conflict with cars and other modes of transportation. That will be the policy outcome. Second, the relocation is temporary, but we're not talking about a period of several months, weeks. We're talking about 2 years until the Columbia Pike multimodal project is completed. And that's if everything goes to schedule. And thirdly, I think it sets a poor precedent of basically caving to the demands of drivers who are willfully ignoring traffic signs at the expense of other modes of transportation. It rewards dangerous and anti-societal behavior. And it doesn't address the fundamental issue of careless and ignorant drivers in a heavily pedestrian area. There are other issues with this particular location, including people running stop signs regularly on their way to the garage. And this relocation will not address that. And I think it also violates the MTP or contradicts it in terms where the bicycle element states that the goal is increasing the mode share bicycle travel. And so, but you're not going to increase that by moving stations away from destinations. And a desolate corner on South Wayne Street is not a destination. So with all that said, I understand the county manager has a broad portfolio and many concerns to work on. And in the email, they stated that they did consult with public groups before arriving at its decision, but they didn't consult the Transportation Commission. And I hope that in the future they will do that because that is literally why we exist. And we would be happy to help them arrive at a more informed decision-making process, or at least take a little bit of the load off for them, because a lot of these decisions are not easy and require compromises. So after that long-winded statement, that's all I have to say. If anybody else has anything to add.
There's also additional ones coming up in November but we will have one on the November 20th, and that will be for the Pentagon City PDSP update. That's the block that has the Costco on it and the Best Buy.
Yeah.
So that would be updated. We also will be having one on the November 16th, I think. Pull that up. Right, and that's for River House. The second LRPC, or the third LRPC for that. That should be including LRPC, which will then move into SBRCs
Okay.
for the River House, the entire site.
Don't we already have liaisons
Yeah,
for
we do. I'm
the?
just
Okay,
reminding you
all
that
right.
These are coming up.
All right, perfect. Yeah. All right, and we need the liaison for the Melrose. Melwood.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
in Aurora Island.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it. Unless anybody else has to say, I think we can call this hearing to an end.
Next meeting.
November 30th, next meeting. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.